Have you heard of variables? They're fundamental in today's information technology landscape, especially in programming. That is why in this first chapter, we're diving deep into variables in Python. We'll explore how to declare them, what operations they support, and their types. Gaining this information is essential for building a solid foundation in Python programming, both generally and specifically within the finance sector. Don't forget that you can find a written version of this course available on our website. Links below. And now, let's dive in. I suggest you create a folder like me somewhere on your computer so you can store all the codes we'll be creating throughout this course. So let's create our first file. Let me call it therefore chapter 1, and it's going to be a Jupyter notebook. So the extension will be IPYNB. Then enter, and there we go. It has been created. I suggest to check that everything went fine. Let's do a little print. So I'll say print variables, types, and operations, which is basically what we're going to see today. Little mistake here, variables, types, and operation. Okay, little control enter, and there we go. The text was displayed correctly, so we're good to go. Maybe just a little control S to save. Cool. So now, how do we define a variable? Well, the first thing is to give it a name. Say, for example, that we want to track the number of stocks of Apple that we have in our portfolio. So let's simply call it Apple stock number. And let's say we have 5 stocks in our portfolio. So I'll put equal 5. Let's actually now execute this cell and see what happened. So we don't see anything appearing, etc. We didn't put any print. We didn't ask for any specific actions. But what happened is that we defined the variable called Apple stock number, and we attributed it a value 5. And the type of this value is, say for now, a number. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that there is always 3 important characteristics in a variable. First, its name. Second, its value. And last, its type. So what type is the value? And I said that this was a number. We'll see in a bit that numbers are a bit complicated. There's different types of numbers itself, but we'll see that in a moment. So nothing happened, but let's actually print. Now, we want to know later on how many Apple stocks do we have. So I'll just put print, but now I'll write the name of my variable, stock number. And now I'll do Control Enter. And surprising or not, it does display the value 5. So what we did here is say, print what is the value of the variable that has the name Apple stock number, which we had defined just before. Great. Now, a variable, as the name states, is variable, which means you can change its value as you please. So let's say now we had a bit of money and we were able to buy a few more Apple stock. Let me actually press enter. So I use the auto-completion feature. And let's say we bought an extra 2. So now we have a total of 7. So I'll define Apple stock number equals 7, and let's do a print and see which is the number that comes out of that. Will it be 5? Will it be 7? Control enter, and indeed is 7, because at that point here in the code, after defining it, the value of Apple stock number is 5. But now here we attribute a new value to this variable, which is 7. So when we print it at this point here, Apple stock number is equal to 7. So that's why we have a 7 here. Now that we've reached this stage, let me point out something important. The way I actually wrote the name of this variable is quite specific. You can see that I only used lowercase letters, and instead of using spaces, I used underscores. There is actually a worldwide convention on how to write Python properly, and this is regrouped under the name PEP8. So if you want to be serious with Python and learn how to write it properly, you should definitely have a look into that. I really recommend it. Another little tip. Also, always define the names of your variables with something intelligible. Even if it's maybe a bit long to type it, at least you know exactly what's stored in there. It will save you some trouble in the future. Let me also show you that you can't actually define a variable with spaces. If I wrote Apple stock number and said equal 5, Python is going to complain. Actually, you already see that VS Code is giving you some red wiggles here, which is showing you that something is wrong. But anyway, I'll do Control Enter, and you can see invalid syntax. So Python doesn't understand this because he sees like potentially 3 names, but you're giving a value of 5 is very weird for him. So no spaces. And that's why we use underscores following the PEP8 convention. Great. Let's actually do something else now. Let's say I'm going to print something called Microsoft stock number. And what do you think is going to happen now? Name error, Microsoft stock number is not defined. Indeed, we wrote the name of maybe a variable, but actually we've never defined it before in the code. So Python is returning us an error, which is simply telling us that this variable has not been defined yet. So if I wanted to define it, I would have to give it a value before asking for the print. So Microsoft stock number, let's say we have 3. So now if I do Control Enter, we do have print equal 3. I remind you that this course is absolutely free. If you feel like supporting this channel, the best way is to like, subscribe, and share this course with anybody who might benefit from it. Anyway, earlier I mentioned that the variable has a characteristic type. So now let's look into the 4 fundamental variable types in Python. I wrote this little piece of code to help us discover together these variable types. So what do we see at the first glance? Well, we see that the first variable that I define is simply a negative number. The second line is now define a number, but with a decimal. Okay. Third line, what do we see? Well, it looks like I've defined a variable that has a bunch of words, which is defined with double quotation marks. And finally, I define a variable that has the value true. And this is what we call a Boolean. So this comes from Boolean logic. So a Boolean could either be true or false. And then what do we have here? Well, we have a series of prints. And you can see that in the print, I'm using a new Python function that we haven't seen yet, which is called type. And as you might guess, this function returns the type of what is given inside its parentheses. Okay, so let's run that cell and we'll see what we get. So you can see that this first number here is of the type int. Int is the short for integer. So this number here is an integer because it doesn't have any decimal. Then the second line, we see it is of the type float. So this is short for floating point number. This simply means a number with a decimal. So you see here in Python, there's actually not really a type number, as I said it before. There's actually integers or floats. Moving on. The third variable here, which was some words, is given to us as a str, which is the short for string. So a string is either defined with double quotation marks like this, but we could have also used a single quotation mark. That works as well. But what is really important to define a string is that you will open your first quotation mark, write whatever text you want to write, and then you close it with the same type of quotation mark. And that will be your string. And finally, as I initiated, the last variable is given to us as a type bool, which is short for Boolean. I've mentioned that the other type of Boolean that you can write is false. So let me simply write that and show it to you. And now I've changed that to false and you see that it is still of the type bool. Great. Something else I want to add is that here we only put one number after the decimal point in our float, but we could have put way more. That wouldn't change the type at all. Let me do a Control Enter and it works fine. Now, just like you can change the value of a variable, you can also change the type of a variable and make some conversions. So let's say, for example, we have a variable 1 that we define to be an integer. Okay, so I'll just simply put print type var1, so we check, and I'll also do print var1. Print with a P is better. Great. And now what I'm going to add is that we're going to have a var2, which is actually going to be str of var1. And you might have guessed what I'm doing here is that I'm converting the type of var1 into a string, and I'm storing this new variable into var2. So now let me simply copy this and add it here, and I'll change it to var2. And we'll run that so we see what comes out of it. The first print returns indeed the type integer, which makes sense because variable 1, var1, was defined to be 5, so no decimal point, a integer. The second print gives us 5 because indeed we're printing the value of var1, which is 5. The third print now returns the type string, which makes sense. As I said, what we did here is that we converted var1 into a string. So that's why type var2 is a string str. And now the last print, we print the value of var2, and what do we get? 5. Interesting, right? Two different types, but when we print the value, we see exactly the same thing, 5 and 5. I actually did this conversion on purpose because in Python and in programming in general, looks can be really deceiving. So seeing something displayed doesn't always give you all the information, and you wouldn't be able to guess the type of a number with just seeing its value displayed. Here, had you seen only 5 without printing the type, you wouldn't know whether it was an integer or a string. And the same would happen for a float, actually. If I just simply put a point here to signify that this is now a float, and I do Control Enter, you see that it's the same thing. Our first print does indeed tell us that it is a float, and it prints the value 5.0. And we do the conversion to string, and we also see 5.0. So you might see some problems arising here if you're not careful, because when you start mixing types together when you're doing operations, things could get hairy. Actually, little tip. Many errors in Python coding actually boil down to mixing types wrongly. So if you can handle your types properly in your code, it will save you a lot of problems. Anyway, moving on. There exist 5 types of operations in between variables in Python. You probably know them already. Let's start with a good old addition, shall we? So let's say we'll store the result of the operation 2 plus 3 in the variable called result. And let's say we want to display that result. So I'll use a print and put result here. So as you might have guessed, we should get 5. And indeed, that's what we got. Okay, I mentioned 5 types of operations. So the next one, what could it be? Well, a subtraction. And this, as far as I remember, should do -1. And there we go. All good. So let's carry on. Now I'm going to add a multiplication. So this is done with this little star sign. So if I run that cell, we get a 6. So far, so good. Then the fourth one should be the division. So this is done with this bar like this. And this will give us 0.6666, etc. Great. Now we get to the fifth operation. And this one you might not know. It is the modulo. So this is represented by a %. And what this modulo does, it gives you the reminder of the Euclidean division. So let me simply run this and we see the result is 2. So I'm asking, make the integer division of 2 divided by 3. So actually there's already too much in 3 to make a 2. So it's 0 times 3 and the reminder has to be therefore 2. Let me maybe put a 7 here. So if I run this, this should be 1. Why is that? How many times do we have 3 fully in 7? Well, we have 2 times 3, that's 6. What is a reminder to get up to 7? Well, it is a 1. 6 plus 1 equals 7. There we go. Something I want to point out here is that Python keeps the simplest type possible for the results of an operation. So here we added 2 integers and the result is actually giving us an integer. If for some reason you wanted the result to be a float, you could totally put just a point here and you will see that this will give you a float as a result. So here as well, the result is an integer. Here as well, it's an integer. But here on the other hand, the division of 2 by 3 gives you a number with decimals. It's 2/3, 0.666. So here the conversion is done automatically by Python. Great. So far, we've only done operations using numbers, so either integers or floats. But it doesn't stop there. You can do operations with strings as well. So let's have a look at that. So let's say var1 is equal to hello. Let's now say I want to print what comes out of 2 times var1. What are we going to get? Let's see. Hello, hello, stacked one after the other. So the multiplication of a string is understood in such a way in Python. Stack was stored in var1 twice. So that's why you get hello followed by hello. Great. What would happen if we put 4? Well, we should see 4 hellos one after the other. Great. Now, little question. What would happen if I put a 5 here? What would you get? Well, no, it won't be 20. It's going to be the string 5 stacked 4 times after the other. So you can see that knowing property-types is very important, because depending the types, the results of the same operations that you do on them can vary completely. Now, what about adding strings together? So let me say that var1 is equal to hello. And let's say that var2 is equal to world. And let's say I want to print var1 plus var2. And there we go. We have hello world. You can note that there's no space here because we actually didn't ask for any space between hello and world. So we could have done this. That's one way to ask for a space because we've included the space in the first word of our string. Or the other way would be doing it this way, saying I'm adding here an actual space and then I'm adding var2. So I'm saying to var1 stack after it a space, and then after that stack var2. So I'm going to run it. And you can see same thing. Great. Now, let's say that var1 is not a string, but it is a number, 1.5. What do you think is going to come out of this? A mistake, because you can't add integers or floats to strings. That just doesn't make any sense. And in the same way, if you put a minus here, this wouldn't work either. And again, in the same way, say we would actually just keep var2, which is the string world, and we divide it by 2, and I run it. And same thing, this is an error. Anyway, so let me clean this. And let's now look at the last operation we can do with what we've seen, which is playing with 2 booleans. So let me call bool1 equal true, and bool2 is equal to false. And let's say we are going to print bool1 times bool2. What do you think is going to come out of this? 0. So in Boolean logic, true is 1 and false is 0. And actually in Boolean logic as well, when you multiply true by false or false by true, what wins is the false. So the result is false. In Boolean logic, a multiplication is equivalent to a logical AND, while the addition in Boolean logic is equivalent to the logical OR. So let's try what we get with a plus. Will it give us a result? And here it is a 1, because in Boolean logic, if you say true or false, the result is true. And I believe that the minus gives the same results, actually. However, the division doesn't work because we've actually divided by false, which is 0. So if I put a 1 here and a 2 here, what will we get? So we're dividing 0 by 1. What should be the result? Well, we actually have a float 0. Great. We have covered all the concepts for today. But to learn Python, and I cannot stress this enough, you have to practice yourself. It is by getting your hands dirty, by making some mistakes. Actually, no, by making a lot of mistakes, by trying to figure things out for yourself, by doing your own projects, that things will properly stick in here. So let me give you a little practical exercise to finish with. You can find it written at the end of this chapter on our website. In this exercise, basically, you want to help John understand what to do with his Apple stocks. You can see that they're currently valued at $135, but he bought 20 of them a while ago when they were worth $60. Then he got 10 more at $145, but he did sell 8 at $120 each. And now John wants to know basically if it's worth selling them now, and he's also curious about potential tax implication. So in the first question, you need to compute the total value of the current Apple stocks in John's portfolio. In the second question now, you have to compute the average purchase price of John's Apple stocks. While in the third question, we ask you to compute the net gains John would make if he actually sold all his Apple stocks now. And final question, maybe a bit more tricky. You have to study 2 cases and you want to help John figure out what would happen, how much money he would pay in tax if he did the sell according to French regulations or regulations in Belgium. You will find at the end of this written course on this chapter a link to our GitHub where there is a suggestion of correction to this exercise. But I do really recommend you try as much as possible by yourself before you take a peek to this correction. Guys, good job for making it up to here. Support us with a little like and a subscription if you will. I'll see you in the next chapter, and please do take care.